Hoodie and choir for that lovely piece. That was lovely, wasn't it? And I thought I imagined silence there for a minute. That was lovely, wasn't it? Okay. And to Gene, a.k.a. Floyd Kramer, for Claire de Lune. That's two for Gene today. He made that awesome breakfast pizza out there. If you had it, did anybody try it? Was that good or what? Excellent. And then, music on top of that. What can we say? I'm sorry, what was that?
Renaissance man.
Renaissance man, yes. Well, okay. Now I'm going to preach. Okay. Actually, I'm not just yet. Do you notice how bright it is over here? The windows have opened up to heavens. And I was going to make some joke about Soulfire throwing frisbees around in the sanctuary earlier, but anyway, they did open the windows to bring in some more light, and it does actually bring in some light, and it's a beautiful day, so that's nice. But apparently one of the window panes has been shattered, so we have to fix that. But anyway, it is nice, isn't it, having the light come in? So we call that a happy accident, I think, and it wasn't Soulfire, it was... blame it on me. I did it. I was downstairs, but I did it. So, anyway. For today's lectionary text, I decided to take the passage on the Transfiguration. And it's one of those weeks where, Pamela sending me an email. I need a title for the sermon, and I really wasn't ready, but I just sort of glanced it over, and I came up with the peak before the dip. And I don't know if that's because it fits. But, it could be that I was thinking about the stock market or the economy or whatever, the peak before the dip, or it could have been thinking about the way my energy level has been this week, just up and down. But this is the last Sunday before we go into Holy Week, or into Lent, actually, excuse me. And Ash Wednesday is this Wednesday, and then we have 40 days of meditation towards the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And so as I had more time to reflect upon this passage and think about what is building up to this passage and what is coming in the next 40 days or so, I thought, well, the peak before the dip may be a good title, but here's another suggestion. Tell me if you like this one. This is the new title. From "This is my beloved Son" to my God, why have you forsaken me?" Or the peak before the dip. You see the idea? Yeah, I can just see Jerry and Warren out there on the sign on Wednesday afternoon trying to get all of that on the sign there. They would hate me for that, I'm sure. But I think that really encapsulates kind of where we're headed, in Scripture here. Because this passage has us situating Jesus in a moment between all of this ministry, all of these things that have been going on, preaching the gospel, healing the sick, raising the dead, arguing with religious leaders, and so on. And if we go back just one chapter to Matthew chapter 16, we have that great moment where Jesus pulls his disciples aside at Caesarea Philippi and asks them, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And the famous responses, right? Well, some say Elijah or Jeremiah or one of the prophets or John the Baptist. And then Jesus says, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter has that moment of clarity. "You're the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus is like, "Oh, Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." That's a very dramatic passage, That's a peak, isn't it? And then there's a dip, because Peter makes a dip of himself by saying, after Jesus talks about, "I'm going to suffer and die," and Peter's like, "Oh, no, please." And then after Jesus had already told him that this has been revealed to you by my Father, Jesus turns around and says to him, "Get thee behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block." Peaks and valleys, peaks and dips, right? And then here we are in chapter 17. Jesus takes Peter and Andrew and James, and Peter, James, and John up to the mountain. And there, for a moment, is another peak. Jesus tears back the veil, and his glory is revealed to his disciples who are there with him. You know, if we had been reading this passage for the first time and we don't know the whole story, wonder what we would have expected to happen next. Jesus to march into Jerusalem and to take over and to become triumphant and all these great and grand things. We can't know, unless we've already read the story, that Jesus' journey forward is going to be down to betrayal, trial, crucifixion, and death. Since we do know the rest of the story, it may be hard for us to kind of totally take in this moment with Jesus and his disciples. Now, we use this word all the time. We have this thing about English where we say a word often enough, we think we know what it means. What does this word transfiguration mean? Have you ever thought about this? What does it mean to be transfigured? Well, I'm going to offer you just a slight definition. I'd like to say it's a time where the supernatural world breaks into the natural world. It is a time of enlightening and an intensification of the revelation. Here we have Jesus, who was born of flesh, baptized in the Jordan, right? And so on, as the creed says. All of a sudden, he reveals to his disciples his true nature, his true being. And what happens to them? They're overwhelmed by the experience. Not here in Matthew, but I think it is in Luke. It has Peter saying, let us build some tabernacles for you here. And then I think Luke goes on to say that Peter didn't really know what to say. He was just kind of trying to say something. But have you ever thought about the parallels between this passage and some of the things that happen in the Old Testament? Like Moses ascending to Mount Sinai, and what happens? A cloud descends, right? And then after he's been up on the mountain for 40 days with God, he comes back down, and what's different about it? Anybody know? We're having a Bible quiz today. I'm going to give out grades for whoever gets the answer right. He's glowing, right? In fact, Moses is so transfigured by that experience of being on the mountain with God that he has to cover his face with a veil because the people cannot look at him. Of course, there are other traditions about that, but it's one tradition is that his face was so affected by that presence that he had to cover it with a veil. What is the significance, do you think, of Moses and Elijah being there with Jesus on the mountain? Any ideas? I'm sorry, what? That's right. Well, it does say that Moses went up on the mountain and died, but it doesn't really tell us much about it. It says that God did something with him, right? God buried his body, but Moses went on up. We sometimes feel bad for Moses for not getting to enter the promised land, but promised land, heaven, And then Elijah, right? He was taken up in a whirlwind. And when the prophets tried to rush after him, the chariot of fire came between them and prevented them from touching him. So they both were translated up to heaven. Also, in terms of the Bible, Moses represents law, right? Moses is the one who receives the Torah and gives it to the people. And Elijah represents the prophets. This significance is probably not lost on Peter, who wants to do something. Here is a sacred spot. Let's build tabernacles and let's remember this. But have you noticed that throughout the Bible, when incredible events happen, the emphasis is not on the location, usually, but on the event. Here, it's not the fact that it happened on this mountain that's important, but what is important is that it was Jesus who was transfigured. There's a cloud that descends. There's a voice from heaven that says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Now, I've asked you some semi-difficult Bible trivia questions so far, so let me ask you an easy one, okay? This is not the first time in the Gospels that we hear God speak from heaven and saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Where else do we hear it? Corbett?
Baptism of Jesus.
In the baptism of Jesus, right? So early in the ministry, at the beginning of his ministry, Jesus comes and is baptized in the Jordan River, and then as he's coming up out of the water, a dove descends, or the Spirit of God descends as a dove, and we hear this voice, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And now, sometime later, as Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, once again, the heavens are torn open, the glory of God is revealed, and the voice from heaven says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I am tempted to read a passage like this with a little bit of skepticism. I know that's a terrible thing for a preacher to admit, but I have to admit it. Sometimes we have a tendency to read these stories, and sometimes you read commentaries and scholars talk about how a story like this is sort of constructed to remind us of the Exodus, of Moses going up on the mountain and receiving the law, or Elijah going up on Mount Carmel and all that, and all these parallels. They try to pass it off as a pious fiction or a theological construction aimed at teaching us something. For others, this is just an outright story. But I disagree. I disagree strongly. We live in an age and a day where we don't see beyond the natural world. It's not because the reality is not there. It's because we aren't willing to see it. I don't necessarily mean members of the church. I mean our culture in general. As a history teacher, it drives me bonkers that all of the emphasis on standardized testing is on two things, right? You know what they are? Do I need to say them out loud? Science and math. So much, every time the American students are compared to students from China, Korea, or Finland or something, it's always math scores and science scores. Okay, I know that science is important, math is important, technology is important, but there is a certain arrogance that we attach to this idea that everything that can be known through the natural world, through science, or through mathematics. I think some of us know better. I think some of us know that there have been moments in our lives in which we have experienced something which is beyond physics, which, Corbett, what is the word which means beyond physics? Metaphysics. We talked about that before. That there are moments in history. I'm sorry, that was not.
No,
oh.
I was called the teacher's pet.
Oh, okay. Hey, don't criticize the teacher's pet. Okay? Yeah. That's right. Oh, see, now what was I talking about here? That's all right. It's okay. There are other things in life. If you can't read, getting back to the scores thing, if you can't read, which is actually becoming more and more of a problem, then you can't really think well. You can't really speak well. And all of those things are very important as well. But there are experiences that we've all had where the veil between the worlds has become thin or has disappeared, and we have experienced the glory and the presence of God. In fact, we read in 2 Peter a comment on this event. 2 Peter 1:16 through 18 says this: "For we did not follow cleverly disguised myths when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ.